Hey, welcome to Planet Hex. I'm Andrew Haunt. I have a confession to make. I was a 90s comics kid. Now, the era is much maligned. It gets a lot of fun made of it because of all the pouches, the muscles, the giant guns, everything being extreme. The redesigning of characters with weird costumes, incidents from people like Rob Liefeld and stuff like that. But there is a lot to be said for it. I had a lot of fun. As a 90s comics kid, I had a lot of fun. I was a sucker for die-cut covers, you know, special edition covers like this foil Silver Sable one from Marvel. I've got a few Marvel ones here. The birth of the 2099 range. This is X-Men 2099 issue 1 with foil stamped cover. There was a lot of these around, die-cut covers, holograms, like on Web of Spider-Man 90 with a Spidey hologram on there. When Generation X, one of my favourite series, started with its entirely foil cover front and back. But then there were spin-offs from big major incidents. There were big stories in comics in the 90s. DC, for example, tried a lot of different stuff. For the start, they killed Superman and broke Batman's back in two of the most arguably iconic stories of the era. Now, I say arguably because people will argue about anything, and believe me, comics fans will argue about a lot. But the death of Superman story was a huge, major story. It got a lot of people aware of comics and looking at comics again. It made international news, as did the Batman story, Nightfall, which saw Bruce Wayne get his back broken by Bane and get replaced by Azrael in his armoured suit. After the death of Superman, though, of course, there was World Without a Superman. And then Superman started coming back. But he didn't come back as one character. He came back as 4 characters, which gave rise to Reign of the Supermen. And I still have my die-cut covers. These are all cut like the logo from Reign of the Supermen. Each one has a poster of each version of Superman in it. For example, if I open up this one with the Last Son of Krypton one, which should be the Eradicator. So you got the outer cover, which revealed the character, and there was also a poster in the middle as well. All those are still in these comics because they were just a cool thing to have, and it was an interesting time. And yeah, it gets a lot of hate, really, 90s comics, and I get that to a certain extent, but it was my era. For a lot of people that talk about comics at length, their era was the 70s or the 80s. More modern fans will talk about the eras of, you know, Brian Michael Bendis and so on, and the eras of Powers and the rise of things like Invincible and so on. But for me, it was the 90s, and there are some very 90s things that were about at the time, such as Malibu Comics and their Ultraverse range. I loved the Ultraverse stuff. That was really cool, because it was kind of more traditional superheroes, but a little bit harder edged. But that gave rise to things like Mantra and the Malibu Sun magazine, which was comic format magazine based. I really miss stuff like that, like Wizard and Hero and stuff like that. And Comics News International, like the newspaper format one, that was awesome. But there were some big stories coming from Marvel as well at the time. And yeah, the rise of Rob Liefeld and all the pouches. But bear in mind, this era also gave us Deadpool. I'm saying. So there were some big titles around at that time. There's issue 1 of X-Force. Look at the size of Cable and his guns. Lots of things like wraparound covers and so on. And these sold enormous amounts. There was the X-Men full-line story, Fatal Attractions, which had wraparound covers with holograms on. I've got a Magneto on that one. On Uncanny X-Men 304, I've got a set of that. It also saw the rise of Wolverine. Yeah, he'd been big before, but in the 90s, Wolverine became a huge, major player. More so than previous years, I would say. Of course, there are also ongoing characters like Iron Man and Silver Surfer that were still getting their own titles out. Iron Man kept undergoing lots and lots of costume changes throughout the years. But that's also the era that brought us the version of War Machine that we know and love now. there's a lot in that era that was decent. One of the big stories that year, that decade, was X-Men #1. I sold millions. And I do have a few copies of this in various editions because this was hugely important to me. Something about this comic, I always wanted these figures off the back and never had any because, you know, I was in England, so we didn't get cool stuff like that. How dare they? How dare they? There was a lot of other stuff going on in the big publishers. There was the rise of a particular title that was into Generation X, as I showed you earlier, the foil one, and things like X Factor, and before X Force there was New Mutants. And there's a good one to spot for fans of early Cable and Deadpool stuff. But on the whole, it was an interesting time. But one thing that defined the era was the rise of independence. In particular, Image, of course. The story of Image Comics is one that a lot of fans will be aware of. And they're also guilty of some of the most outlandish artwork and ridiculous titles. Like we've got here, Stormwatch. There was Wildcats. There was Gen 13. I love Gen 13, even though it was very much a Marvel knockoff. There's Union. There's a whole series of Union in there with its hollow cover on the first issue. There was the debut of Prophet. And Spawn, of course, there's Spawn. But there was also some more intelligent stuff. What we've seen is more intelligent stuff now anyway. And I would mention The Max. The Max was a great comic. Fantastic series. Very, very different. Sam Keith did an amazing job on this. This is The Max issue 2. But there were a lot of other independent things going on around the 90s as well. And while the big companies like Marvel and DC and very quickly Image were focusing on, you know, muscles and guns and stuff like that, there was still a lot going on in independent comics. Like the smaller publishers like Impact, who brought titles like Jaguar that I really liked. And, of course, Femforce that I ended up writing for at AC Comics. Then there were even darker things like Razor that had a lot of things that were a little near the knuckle. There were publishers like Chaos Comics that brought us Lady Death and Chastity and Purgatory and Evil Ernie. And check this out. This is Evil Ernie Straight to Hell, issue 1 of 5 from October 1995. So it's card cover, it's got Evil Ernie on the front, it's got a live action Evil Ernie on the back. But check out what you can do with this cover. You can fold it out into a coffin and you get a full image of Evil Ernie in his coffin. Now this was fun. I was a kid and I was snapping this stuff up because it was a lot of fun. Like there was a Bloodstrike issue 1, the Image comic, that came with heat reactive blood. So when you would warm the blood, it would show, and then it would fade away when you change the temperature of it. But there are some things that really stuck around. There's Warrior Nun Ariada. There was Ninjak from Valiant Comics, another foil cover, which had a lot going for it. And it is a shame that Valiant went the way that it did. I think Valiant had a lot to offer. They were also the creators of Valiant Vision, which was a quite an impressive 3D method, which was quite simple. All they did was pull the warm colours to the front and colder colours to the background. And when you put these certain glasses on, it would emphasise the warm colours over the cold colours, creating an immersive 3D effect. It was really, really clever. There were occasional crossovers with publishers as well. Of course, there was Amalgam, which we won't talk about. But things like this that appealed to me, because I love Generation X, I love Gen 13, and they crossed over. But it also made it possible for me to check out some English comics that I knew existed. I was a big fan of 2000 AD, for example, but I didn't read some of the classics. And finding some of the American collector editions of stuff like Zenith, that was really cool and made me more aware of stuff that was in my own local heritage. And because I'm an English guy, if you haven't noticed, as an English comics fan in the 90s, a lot of my focus was on English comics. So things like 2000 AD, of course, and Judge Dredd magazine. I have an annual from that somewhere. Yes. I have the Judge Dredd yearbook from 1993, signed by several of the creators. And I got this signed at Nostalgia and Comics in Sheffield, which became Forbidden Planet. And in the queue there was a guy that became a close friend of mine, like 20 years later. And that was really cool. So I had a different sort of view of it, because with the English comic scene, you was always stuff like 2000 AD, Just Red magazine. We'd also had Eagle, that had been around for a long time, and a lot of spin-off comics for things like Transformers and so on. But for me, there was a comic called Overkill, which I thought was wonderful. It was really, really cool. It was Marvel UK, and for like the first half of its run, it was mainly just Marvel UK characters. There were some that had popped up in other parts of Marvel, such as Death's Head and subsequently Death's Head 2, and then Motormouth and Killpower, I think, showed up in a few things. But things like Digitech and Knights of Pendragon and Dark Angel, Hell's Angel stroke Dark Angel, were really, really cool strips that you really didn't get. You didn't get the usual American vibe from it. It was much more of an anarchic 2000 AD toxic sort of thing going on there. A bit of Tank Girl influence as well in some of it. And it was a really interesting time. But, you know, hindsight is a strange thing, because everyone who grew up with comics has their own favourite era, and for me it is the 90s, because that was my era. That was the era where I went out and got these things on a monthly basis, weekly in terms of 2000 AD, throughout stories like the Necropolis and so on. But it was an interesting time, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that gets lost along the way with people making fun of the era. Yeah, a lot of the things were overblown. There were some very bad decisions in terms of changing people's costumes, and the storyline ideas that were floated were not always the best. But it was fun, and you know what? That's the point. That's the point of comic books, is to be entertaining and to be fun. And throughout the 90s, as an avid reader of all kinds of comics, I certainly had a lot of that. So thank you. And shout out to all my other 90s comic book fans out there. I'm Andrew Horn. I usually talk about VHS and VHS culture and weird old movies on this channel. If you like that sort of thing, please do like and subscribe. For now, thank you for watching this episode of Planet Hex.